Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling cholesterol. Now, it's a topic most people think they get, high's bad, low's good.
Right. Simple. But the reality, it's actually surprisingly complex, and maybe, just maybe, modern medicine has some, well, significant blind spots here.
Exactly. And for you listening, if you want that core understanding without getting totally swamped in details, think of this as your shortcut.
Yeah, a shortcut to the real story behind cholesterol and, crucially, how it connects to your metabolic health.
So our mission today is really to question some of those standard beliefs about cholesterol, the ones you've probably heard a million times.
We're going to dive into areas where maybe the current medical thinking is missing some key parts of the puzzle.
And uncover some, frankly, game-changing views on what actually drives our health.
And we've got some great sources to draw on. We've been listening to cardiothoracic surgeon Dr. Philip Ovadia on Paul Saladino's podcast.
Cardiologist Dr. Aseem Malhotra talking with Mark Hyman.
And some really fascinating research from Dave Feldman, which he discussed on Dhru Purohit's podcast.
So, yeah, get ready. This should be packed with some surprising stuff, hopefully bring some clarity to what often feels like a bit of a maze.
Okay, so where do we start? Maybe with a common scenario that kind of instantly shows why the simple LDL is bad idea might be flawed.
Yeah, perfect. We saw this tweet from Gwendolyn, your husband, right? 6 months into a carnivore diet, feeling great.
Healthy diet, feeling good.
But his blood work comes back and boom, LDL is way up. And his doctor, understandably alarmed.
Right, and Dr. Ovadia says he sees this kind of thing all the time in his practice. It's not unusual.
And his immediate point, Dr. Ovadia, is that LDL itself isn't automatically the villain.
No, it's about the context, isn't it? The environment inside your body.
He actually says trying to boil down heart disease risk to just that one LDL number is, well, his word was foolhardy.
That really hits home. Foolhardy, because it ignores so much else.
So he's saying look beyond just the total LDL-C number. You need more detail.
Exactly. Like, what size are the LDL particles? Is there underlying insulin resistance? What about inflammation? Those things matter hugely.
Right, because you could have high total LDL, but maybe it's mostly the big, fluffy, less worrying kind, or it could be the small, dense stuff. One number just doesn't tell you.
It doesn't. And Ovadia makes this critical point. If you really want to know the risk, you've got to actually look at the arteries.
With imaging, you mean? Like a CAC scan?
Yeah, a coronary artery calcium scan or even a CT coronary angiogram.
Right.
Look directly at the vessels. He said something powerful, like every patient he operates on is basically a failure of preventative medicine.
Wow. That is powerful. Okay, this brings us to some really interesting, especially with low-carb or keto folks. These lean mass hyper-responders, What's that about?
Okay, so lean mass hyper-responders, they're typically lean people, metabolically healthy, right? But when they go low carb, keto, maybe carnivore.
Cholesterol does something specific.
Yeah, you see this pattern. LDL cholesterol goes way up. The HDL cholesterol, the good kind, also goes up.
Right.
And triglycerides, they drop way down, which is generally seen as good.
So high LDL, high HDL, low triglycerides. And that's where David Feldman's work comes in.
Exactly. Feldman, he's an engineer originally, but he's really dug into this. His study looked specifically at these people, these lean mass hyper-responders.
What was the question? Were their arteries getting worse? Was plaque building up?
Yeah, that was it. Because conventional thinking, Lipidology 101, says if your LDL is super high for a year,
you'd expect more plaque. Right. That's the whole LDL causes atherosclerosis idea.
Precisely. That's the central dogma. But Feldman's study, well, it didn't find that.
Okay, so what did it find? This is the really interesting bit.
It found that on average over the year they followed these people, their plaque scores stayed flat, remarkably stable.
Even with LDL levels averaging, what was it, really high?
Over 270 milli-GDL on average. So yeah, really high by conventional standards. And yet on average, no significant plaque progression.
Okay. But did anyone's plaque increase? And if so, why? Was it linked to the LDL?
Good question. They looked at that. And interestingly, neither the LDL level nor the APOB level will get to APOB correlated with plaque increase in this group during that year.
So it wasn't the highest LDL people who saw increases?
Nope. The only factor they found that was linked to plaque getting worse was how much plaque the person already had at the beginning of the study.
That's fascinating. So if you started with more plaque, it was more likely to progress, kind of regardless of how high your LDL went in that year.
Seems like it. Based on this data, it really puts a dent in the idea that LDL is the sole or even primary driver, doesn't it?
It really does. So if it's not just about LDL, what is the crucial thing? Where should the focus be?
And this is where both Dr. Ovadia and Dr. Malhotra really hammer home the point. It's about metabolic health. Ovadia literally says, metabolic health, I think, is king.
King. Okay. So shifting focus from just cholesterol numbers to the underlying metabolism, insulin sensitivity.
Absolutely. How well your body handles insulin is key. Dr. Ovadia likes to see fasting insulin under 8 OML.
And how do you measure that? Just fasting insulin?
That's a good start. But you can also look at things like HOMA-IR or LPIR scores, which estimate insulin resistance, or even C-peptide levels. It's about how efficiently your body is using insulin, not just your blood sugar at one point in time.
Okay, so insulin sensitivity is huge. What else falls under that metabolic health is king umbrella?
Inflammation, definitely.
Right.
Dr. Ovadia looks at markers like HSCRP, high-sensitivity C-reactive protein.
The general inflammation marker.
Yeah, and also MPO myeloperoxidase, which is thought to be more specific to inflammation in the blood vessels themselves.
Ah, okay. And Dr. Malhotra mentioned inflammation too, right? Saying heart disease is fundamentally inflammatory.
He did. He referenced a paper from like 20 years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine saying just that. It's not just plumbing, it's an immune issue, chronic inflammation.
So high LDL might be way less concerning if someone is super insulin sensitive and has very low inflammation.
That seems to be the argument, yes. The context changes the risk profile entirely.
And this connects to something Dr. Malhotra brought up about statins, something about CoQ10.
Right. He links metabolic problems like insulin resistance to issues with our mitochondria, little power plants in our cells.
Okay.
And statins work by blocking an enzyme, HMG-CoA reductase, which makes cholesterol. But that same pathway, it also makes coenzyme Q10.
CoQ10.
Yeah.
Which is important for
Energy production,
Yeah.
especially in the mitochondria. So by blocking cholesterol production, statins also lower CoQ10.
which could potentially hurt mitochondrial function and maybe even contribute to insulin resistance.
That's the concern he raises. It seems kind of paradoxical, right? Taking a drug for heart health that might negatively impact metabolic health via mitochondria.
Yeah, that is.
Mm.
Okay, we mentioned APOB earlier. You said Dr. Ovadia thinks it's a bit better than LDL-C, but still not the full picture.
Yeah, APOB, or apolipoprotein B. It's the main protein found on LDL particles, but also on VLDL and IDL particles. Think of it like this. LDL-C measures the amount of cholesterol inside all those particles.
While APOB measures the number of the particles themselves.
Pretty much. And the thinking is maybe the number of particles is more important than the total cholesterol they carry, because each particle could potentially get stuck in the artery wall.
Okay, so more particles, more potential risk is the idea.
That's the argument from the APOB is causal camp. But, like Ovadia points out, even APOB isn't uniform. An APOB on a big, fluffy LDL particle might be different, risk-wise, than one on a small, dense LDL particle.
So still context dependent.
Still context dependent. And again, you look at Feldman's study on those lean mass hyperresponders.
Their APOB was high too, presumably, along with their LDL.
Yes, but APOB levels didn't correlate with plaque increase in that group over that year, so there's a disconnect there.
And didn't Dr. Ovadia also say something about looking back at older studies like Framingham?
He did. He mentioned that when researchers control for insulin resistance in those big data sets, the apparent link between LDL and heart disease gets much, much weaker.
So metabolic health insulin resistance specifically might be the big confounder that we've been missing in the standard cholesterol story.
It certainly looks that way based on what these experts are saying. The context seems absolutely critical.
Okay, so the picture is definitely getting more complex than lower LDL, full stop, which inevitably leads us to question. Well, the whole system, Dr. Malhotra called it a $1 trillion industry around cholesterol lowering.
Yeah, the financial side is hard to ignore. He mentioned that conversation between Dr. Peter Libby at Harvard and Mark Hyman. Libby apparently said, look, we know lifestyle works for heart disease.
But getting funding for lifestyle research is tough.
Almost impossible, apparently. Compared to funding for drug trials, which is readily available, it tells you something about where the money flows, doesn't it?
It really does. And Malhotra also brought up Professor John Ioannidis.
Ah, yes, the why most published research findings are false guy.
Right. Especially in fields where there are significant financial interests at play.
And let's face it, statins have been absolute blockbusters, some of the best-selling drugs ever. So you can see why there'd be a strong push to maintain the narrative that lowering cholesterol with drugs is the main answer.
Which brings us to the drugs themselves. Statins. How effective are they really? Dr. Malhotra seemed to have gone on quite a journey with this.
He did. He used to prescribe them a lot, he said. but became more skeptical over time. He mentioned how Brown and Goldstein, the Nobel winners who figured out the LDL receptor.
They predicted heart disease would be basically gone by the early 2000s.
Yeah, because of statins. But obviously that didn't happen. Heart disease is still the #1 killer.
So why didn't widespread statin use eradicate it?
Well, Malhotra points to a big BMJ study looking at Europe. Statin use went way up over a decade, but cardiovascular mortality didn't really go down correspondingly.
Because the drop in heart disease deaths we have seen isn't mainly from statins.
He argues it's more likely due to less smoking, much better emergency care, things like stents, clot busters, and maybe defibrillators being more available, treating the acute event better.
That makes sense. So what about the actual benefit for someone taking a statin? Say someone who's already had a heart attack. Secondary prevention.
Yeah, even there, the average increase in life expectancy is, well, surprisingly small. He quoted about 4 days extra over 5 years for high-risk groups.
4 days over 5 years.
That was the figure he cited. It brings up this idea of the number needed to treat, or NNT. How many people have to take the drug for one person to actually benefit? And sometimes that number is quite high.
And Dr. Ovadia's point comes back here too, right? Focus on the individual patient, not just population stats.
Exactly. Which leads us to the downsides. Are there risks to lowering cholesterol, particularly with statins?
Side effects, yeah. What are the common ones?
Well, there's an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes, which is concerning given the metabolic link we just discussed.
Right, also muscle aches, fatigue. What about cognitive stuff? Memory.
Yeah, things like memory problems, brain fog. Dr. Malhotra seemed particularly worried about potential long-term cognitive effects, though acknowledges more research is needed there. It's definitely a reported side effect for some people.
And we already talked about the CoQ10 depletion mechanism.
Right, blocking HMG-CoA reductase lowers CoQ10, potentially impacting mitochondria and maybe insulin sensitivity.
And it's weird that CoQ10 supplements aren't routinely recommended alongside statins, isn't it?
It does seem odd, given the known mechanism. And Ovadia mentioned other things can hit mitochondria too, like metformin, even berberine sometimes. It just underscores how central mitochondrial health is.
Dr. Ovadia also seemed concerned about transparency, like not having full access to all the data from the original statin trials.
Yeah, he raised that point, wanting to see the raw data, which often isn't fully public. It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Okay, so statins have issues. What about the newer cholesterol drugs? PCSK9 inhibitors, azeta-bay, bempedoic acid.
Both Ovadia and Malhotra kind of bring it back to the same fundamental question. Should we be lowering cholesterol this aggressively in the first place? Especially if someone is metabolically healthy, low inflammation.
They're questioning the premise itself.
Exactly. Ovadia mentioned his frustration when a patient decides against a statin, maybe due to side effects, and their doctor just switches them to ezetimibe or something else.
Without addressing the underlying metabolic health.
Right. It's like treating the number, not the patient or the root cause, which loops back to Ovadia's statement.
Cholesterol was never the enemy.
That's the core idea. Which, maybe this is a good point. Before we go deeper into metabolic health solutions, maybe we should quickly clarify what cholesterol is and why we even need it.
Good idea. Because for all the talk about lowering it, it's actually essential, isn't it?
Absolutely vital. Cholesterol is this waxy, fat-like substance. Our bodies make most of it. We don't just get it from food.
And what does it do?
Oh, tons of things. It's a key part of our cell membranes, gives them structure and flexibility. Super important.
Okay. Membranes. What else?
It's the starting material, the precursor for making all our steroid hormones. Think cortisol, aldosterone, estrogen, testosterone.
All the big ones.
Yep. And vitamin D synthesis relies on cholesterol too. Plus, the liver uses it to make bile acids, which we need to digest and absorb fats properly.
So cell structure, hormones, vitamin D, digestion. It's pretty crucial stuff.
Definitely not something you'd want to eliminate entirely. And how does it get around? That's where LDL and HDL come in?
Right, the lipoproteins, the transport vehicles.
Exactly. Since cholesterol isn't water-soluble, it needs these packages. LDL, low-density lipoprotein, carries cholesterol from the liver out to the tissues that need it.
Often called the bad one, but it has a job to do.
It has a necessary function. And HDL, high-density lipoprotein, the good one, its job is partly to transport cholesterol back to the liver for recycling or disposal.
So it's really about the balance, the type of particles, and like we keep saying, the overall metabolic environment they're operating in.
Precisely. It's way more nuanced than just LDL bad, HDL good.
Okay, that's super helpful context. So bringing it back to metabolic health, The thing our experts are calling king. The real key to getting healthier.
Yes. Insulin resistance seems to be at the heart of it for so many chronic conditions, not just cardiovascular disease.
And yet, it's often not tested. Malhotra's statistic about standard labs.
Yeah, less than 1% of tests at Quest, including an insulin measurement, he said. It's kind of shocking when you think how important it might be.
Especially when you hear that other statistic you mentioned, like 2/3 of people having a heart attack already have diabetes or prediabetes.
Exactly. The link between metabolic dysfunction and cardiovascular events seems incredibly strong.
So if we want to fix the root cause, we need to fix metabolic health. The main tool for that is
Lifestyle. Primarily diet. Both experts really emphasize that diet is the ultimate fix for insulin resistance.
what kind of dietary advice are they giving?
Broadly, it's about cutting out the ultra-processed stuff. Reduce or eliminate processed foods. Definitely seed oils, refined carbohydrates, sugars.
And focus on
Whole, nutrient-dense foods. Real food, basically. Dr. Ovadia also throws in the importance of sleep, getting sunlight, movement, the foundational lifestyle factors.
You mentioned seed oils there again.
Yeah.
That seems to be a big point of concern, especially for Dr. Ovadia. The linoleic acid.
Yes, he connects high intake of linoleic acid, which is abundant in many common seed oils, to potential mitochondrial dysfunction and inflammation.
And he talked about the historical shift in fats.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic when you look at it. Over the last 125 years, we've gone from diets where animal fats were dominant,
Lard, butter, tallow.
right, to diets incredibly high in these processed vegetable and seed oils. And that time frame lines up pretty closely with the rise of heart disease as a major killer.
He mentioned heart disease being rare back in 1900.
Yeah, rarely described, he said, when animal fat intake was the norm. It makes you question the narrative that saturated fat is the main dietary evil, and seed oils are heart healthy, doesn't it?
It really does. Why do we need so much linoleic acid? Maybe we don't. And this all circles back again to the mitochondria.
The energy hums, yeah. Both experts keep highlighting how crucial mitochondrial health is, and how things like statins, maybe diets high in sugar or seed oils, can damage them.
And insulin resistance itself is like a symptom of mitochondrial failure.
Ovadia described it that way, yeah. At a cellular level, it's a failure to produce energy efficiently. So supporting your mitochondria seems absolutely key for metabolic and therefore cardiovascular health.
Okay, so this all sounds compelling, but it definitely goes against the grain of standard medical advice sometimes. How hard is it for someone like Dr. Ovadia to even talk about this with colleagues?
He admits it can be tough. Challenging deeply ingrained beliefs never is. He said his approach is often less confrontational, more like, okay, what are we missing here?
Focusing on the potential blind spots.
Yeah. He finds that bringing up insulin resistance, specifically something that might be overlooked, often gets a better reception than just railing against cholesterol guidelines.
Is the tide turning at all? Are more doctors thinking this way?
He suggested it's slow. More doctors might be trying low-carb themselves personally, but they're still hesitant to recommend it widely because it goes against official guidelines.
So it sounds like change might need to come more from the ground up, from informed patients.
That's a big part of it, yeah. Both experts really stress the importance of you, the listener, getting informed, taking charge of your own health journey.
So what's the practical advice? Go to your doctor and
Have an informed conversation. Don't just ask about your LDL. Ask about your fasting insulin. Ask about HSCRP. Ask about your HOMA-IR score. Understand your metabolic health picture.
realize that making positive diet and lifestyle changes can massively improve that picture.
Absolutely. Even if, paradoxically, your LDL number goes up in the process, like with those lean mass hyperresponders, the overall context might be much healthier.
What about David Feldman's work? You mentioned his initial study had limitations. Is he doing more?
He is. He was very clear about the limitations, specific population, 1-year follow-up. He's actively fundraising for a bigger, longer-term study, the TRIADE study, to get more robust data.
So the initial findings are encouraging for that specific group, but not definitive proof for everyone.
Exactly. He's quite nuanced. He says the data is comforting for metabolically healthy lean mass hyperresponders, but it's not a green light for everyone to just ignore high LDL or APOB completely, especially if metabolic health isn't optimal.
Is there any middle ground emerging? like using imaging.
Yes, he mentioned that some clinicians are now more open to using CAC scans for people on keto diets with high LDL to get a direct look at the arteries. That seems like a reasonable approach for some.
What about medication for those still worried by high LDL, even if metabolically healthy?
He touched on that too, suggesting that if someone prioritizes metabolic health but remains uncomfortable with very high LDL, maybe an intervention like ezetimibe, which works differently from statins, could be considered.
But the primary focus remains metabolic health.
Always, his core message is understand your metabolic status, understand your own comfort level with the numbers, and work with your doctor to make informed decisions. Don't just blindly follow one number.
It really highlights that tension, doesn't it, between broad public health guidelines, often based on averages for a generally unhealthy population,
And the need for truly personalized medicine that considers the individual's specific context. The one-size-fits-all approach just might not work for cholesterol.
Yeah, seems like a crucial point.
Definitely.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, key takeaways. Cholesterol is way more complex than the simple good-bad story.
Absolutely. You have to view it in the context of overall metabolic health. Insulin resistance and inflammation seem to be the real drivers of risk for many people.
And the conventional wisdom, focusing almost exclusively on lowering LDL, might be flawed, maybe even driven partly by financial incentives.
That's certainly the argument presented by Dr. Malhotra. And the evidence suggests lifestyle changes targeting metabolic health are incredibly powerful. Probably the most important lever we have.
We definitely challenged some standard thinking today. Hopefully gave you some aha moments.
Yeah, hopefully offered a more nuanced way to think about cholesterol and its role.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. Given all this complexity, these potential blind spots, what health beliefs that you've held for a long time might be worth questioning now, worth exploring further for your own health?
Maybe delve deeper into understanding your own metabolic health. Be critical, ask questions, seek more information.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. We really hope it's given you some valuable new perspectives on cholesterol.